What sort of expectations do you think a Gen Z person might have about what the world of work is like?
We've had technology growing up, like using it quite a lot, and that probably is a very, very big difference compared to like older generations when they didn't have that.
Would you be prepared to sacrifice salary for more work-life balance?
I think it's definitely using social media to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's an appetite in your generation generally to run your own company, be an entrepreneur, set up your own thing? So you just come down on the train from Liverpool?
I have,
actually. I can see on, is that the Liverpool top on?
No.
Down from Liverpool University for the weekend, come home.
Yeah.
Get some home cooking, get your washing done.
I know, that's the hope. The train's actually smoothly running for us.
I know, you've had a few less successful trips in the past, haven't you? Would you generally take the train somewhere if you had the choice to? Or would you prefer to drive if you could?
I'd prefer to drive if I could, I'd say. But also, I'm not exactly very experienced in driving in cities, so I think a train is quite nice.
Depending on the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not cheap though, is it? You do have a student rail card or something.
Yeah,
but
it's still not that cheap though. Yeah, it's like £30 return Shrewsbury to Liverpool.
Oh, right. So, yeah, we've got to take that out of your student funding. Bit tight. Still, maybe your parents will pay for you coming back. And
the odd one depends on the occasion.
If they want to see you. Good. Okay, well, we're going to do a podcast.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow Limited, where every week we try and come up with something useful or interesting or a bit wacky for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises here in the UK. Now, often we have a bit of a chat between me and Richard, but sometimes we have a guest, and this week we're very lucky to have a guest in the studio with us, and it's Kirsty Parry.
Yes.
Declaration of interest, Kirsty is my daughter. She's come home for the weekend from university. But we thought we'd take that opportunity to try and find out if there's a perspective that business owners and managers might find useful, to find out what are the current attitudes, trends, things that maybe we as oldies miss out on, but we could learn from an 18-year-old. So thanks for joining us.
That's okay. I hope to give some insight.
Very brave of you to come along, sit in our famous podcast studio.
I know, yeah. It's a very good setup. I'm quite excited.
I know your grandma will be very jealous because she keeps talking about our podcast studio. So I thought that'd be a good idea just to find out a little bit, not expecting you to give us the perspective from inside businesses because you're not there, but you're a consumer and soon you'll be entering the workplace and you'll be therefore, one of the high spenders and you'll be looking at all sorts of different things which businesses have to be more aware of. And the problem that people, when they get into their 50s and beyond, is that they get out of touch with where some of their market is. And there's a real danger that we all just think the world thinks like we do and they buy like we do and they communicate like we do. And I don't think we do. But what do you think? Do you think this generation coming through now into the workforce is very different from the ones before it?
I think there are definitely similarities, but I mean, a very, very major difference is just the amount of money that say your generation has compared to mine, where you'll have to budget a lot more.
Yeah, sure.
And sort of live.
And I guess to some degree that's always been the case, right?
Definitely.
Someone who's had a chance to put savings aside over the whole of a career is going to be very different. Yeah. But you're right in that when you're in that position, you can easily forget what it's like when someone's on a tight budget or they're having to make different sorts of decisions about how they buy and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
What about attitudes? Do you think that when you see even people a bit older than you, in their 30s or 40s, for example, do you think they were much different? Do you sense, because in our generation, we're now talking about the fact that Gen Z is coming through and it's totally different to all the generations before it. Do you feel that, or do you just think, well, I don't know any different, it seems normal to me?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know any different. It does seem fairly normal, but then also I guess that we do have we've had technology growing up, using it quite a lot, and that probably is a very, very big difference compared to older generations when they didn't have that, because that creates...
Well, you're digital natives, they call it, don't they? So you were born almost with a phone in your hand and an iPad to entertain you, and you've never known a time without emails and social media and all of that stuff that came to us halfway through our lives, or maybe even later on. So it gives you a different perspective. What do you think as well about the whole experience of COVID? Do you think that you guys had a tougher time than older generations through COVID, or was it just tough for everybody?
It was definitely tough for everybody, but I do think that for my generation, it was just in such a key point of their lives of when they are meant to be like communicating with people, and you just sort of grow and mature like the most in that sort of time period. And I think a lot of people have been very, very affected from it and haven't really got back to any sort of normal point.
And when did, for your age group, when did it land exactly? Which exams were you doing and what stage?
It was pre-exams. It was year 8, year 9, so 12, 13 years old. But it was just like the start of when people were starting to go out and socialise a lot more and seeing friends and actually having a bit more independence. And then we got all like cooped away.
And obviously speaking generally for friends that you know without naming names, how do you think generally speaking people have coped with that?
I think it was difficult. A lot of people I know very much struggled with their mental health and had a lot of new challenges, like just during COVID. I think some people, it depends on who they are. Some people absolutely thrived in COVID. They loved just being able to be on their own, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for how they are now able to like socially interact.
That's probably true of all generations, isn't it? Some people, quite enjoyed the chance to not have to socialise as much, but missed out on others. Okay, let's ask a few questions then that might be interesting to listeners in terms of, how as a body of consumers, you're all maybe different to generations that came before you. And the first question I want to ask is where you get your news from. What media outlets do you look at? We were brought up reading newspapers and watching one of 3 channels on the telly. The world is a bit different, right? So how do you and your generation find out what's going on in the world?
I think a lot of my generation get their news from social media, Instagram, TikTok, which is never going to be, you don't know whether it's actually going to be accurate. I think personally I get a little bit from Instagram, but I never really trust it. But I do like to listen to some like news podcasts, and I always get like the headlines from like the Times and the Economist, and I'll sometimes have a little read at some interesting articles I see. Is
that unusual, do you think, for your generation, or do you think that everybody does have a little bit of that old media available to them?
I feel like a lot of people don't really. A lot of people don't want to think about the news and what's going on because it's a bit scary and a lot of it doesn't sound very nice. So then they just sort of stick to whatever, like TikTok and the algorithm will feed them, and then it,
Do you ever check your sources?
If it's on Instagram, if it's something I'm interested in, I would. If it's something which I'd actually want to speak to people about, because I have no idea where that will have come from.
Yeah.
But I don't if it's just from a mainstream news app.
So you're more likely to trust, the BBC or something like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and do you think that's true as well of your friends? Do you hear them parroting things that they've seen on social without questioning it, just saying that must be true because I've seen it on TikTok?
Yeah, I definitely do see people just sprouting out information which it could be absolute nonsense, and it's just
not challenged it. And what do you think, so a bit more relevant now maybe to listeners who are in business, where they decide to put adverts into these social media? So Instagram is a place you could advertise stuff through the Meta platform, or TikTok, clearly you can do a lot, and you'll see it as you're scrolling through. No doubt you get served up with adverts. Do you just flick through them, or sometimes do you find they're interesting?
No, I do actually sometimes find them interesting, and I'll look into them. I feel like I'm a lot less likely to, I don't often go through an advert and then choose to like buy something from there, but I think I'd be more likely to buy it if it is like an influencer talking about something and showing it in like real time, and maybe if it's just, I don't know, a clothes product or something, what it actually looks like in real life, and then I'd be more likely to then.
Have you bought anything off Instagram?
I have.
Yeah?
Yes, I have.
So it does work?
Yeah, my like bag I use for uni.
And
that's
you got that from there?
Sturdy for months.
Right, and you saw that on Instagram and you saw someone else using it just like any other marketing?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's where you get your general input and your news and all that sort of thing. What do you make, just in terms of current affairs, what do you make of what's going on this week with all this tariff business going on?
I have to say I don't really know enough about it, but I'd like to know a lot more about it. I find that sometimes when I'm hearing headlines in the news, I'd need to do more research, because what they say is expecting people to have a little bit more of a background of what's going on. So with the tariff stuff, it's just a little bit over my head.
That hasn't come through yet on the social media channels that you're keeping an eye on?
No, not really.
So just give us a brief rundown. What are the main popular social media, various medias that you think are more common now amongst your age group?
Definitely TikTok and like Instagram and Snapchat are probably like the main ones which people use, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And do you see adverts on them? They're all fairly commercial.
Not on Snapchat because that's just sort of a messaging platform, but the other two, you get loads of adverts.
Right.
Yeah.
And you don't mind that, you use them? Yeah. And for news, you're relying on the same sort of inputs really, but every now and again a bit of mainstream.
I'd say if I'm going to actually trust in news, I'd much more be likely to rely on the mainstream.
Do you ever watch TV as it's broadcast?
No, never.
Do you listen to the radio?
Nope.
You listen to podcasts?
Yeah, I listen to podcasts, and if I'm watching TV, it will probably just be on Netflix or Prime Video or something. I don't have, I never watched
a series or something, rather than, you would never watch the news at 10?
No.
You couldn't tell me who presents the news at 10?
No, I couldn't.
No, that's interesting. It's such a difference, isn't it, from when we grew up, because it's all we had. I suppose it was that common experience. We were all watching the same thing at the same time because we could, whereas there's this plethora of things.
There's just so much option,
Yeah. Okay, shopping preferences. So if you're a classic consumer of representing someone of your age group, do you prefer shopping online or in retail outlets, in shops?
I'd say I probably prefer the experience of shopping in person, but I don't do it as much as I do online shopping. I do a lot more online shopping.
Right. Do you find that when you decide to shop in person, you can find the products you want? Are the ranges available in the shops?
Usually, it then just also requires the effort of actually putting time aside to go into town or go to somewhere where they have all the shops which I want, and then spend a lot longer looking through all of the clothes and finding what I want or whatever I'm buying.
So a balance of pros and cons. You don't see there being a problem of having to wait a day for something to be delivered?
No.
Whereas you'd see more of a problem with having to physically go into town and pick it up, even though it's instant.
Yeah.
You've got to put the effort in. What do you think about the fact that retailers on the high street have higher costs to bear and online doesn't, and therefore that's why it's cheaper? Do you have any sympathy for that position, or does it, from a consumer's point of view, you don't care? That's just, give me the cheapest stuff.
I do definitely have sympathy for it, but I think I probably am more just focusing on the money sort of side of it and how much it costs for me.
What about the ethics of different products? Are you worried about whether something may have been made with child labour in Bangladesh or made in a way in China that you wouldn't agree, polluting processes or something? Does that cross your mind at all, or does that not really occur as a thought?
I'd say it does definitely cross my mind. I don't like shopping from like the really, really like cheap places like Shein and stuff, because I think that it's not very ethically sound. But then I also think that where I am shopping, even if it is more expensive, like this is like Urban Outfitters, I can't afford to get many clothes from there, and it is a lot more expensive, and I still don't know how ethically sound they actually are, because I think a lot of, I'm not sure.
But it wouldn't be enough of a problem for you to go and investigate that. You wouldn't go and look up their website and see.
No, to be honest, because if I'm wanting something really ethically sound, it's probably going to be way out of my budget of what I can afford.
So you can't afford your principles.
Yeah.
What about if something was, but it was badged as being zero carbon, for example? Does that matter to you?
What, if I'm buying clothes and it's...
Well, any product, but yeah, clothes in particular, yeah. If there were two products, maybe you had to pay a little bit more for it to be zero carbon, not such that you couldn't afford it, but there's a small premium on it. Instead of, say, £10 for a T-shirt, it's £11. Would you do that if it was zero carbon?
Yeah, I definitely would.
Do you think that's something that people think quite a lot about in their buying decisions?
I think it's kind of always something which people are aware of. So if they'd be given an outright choice between something which is zero carbon, then I think they'd pick that.
Then you would. And do you think there's much left in customer loyalty? Would you stick with certain brands because you feel some affinity to them, or do you just go every time to a different one?
I'd say I do have certain loyalties. I pretty much just shop at the same shops as I always have, and I think that's probably the same for most people I know. Yeah.
And that's online as well as in the high street.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the apps which I have on my phone, and I'll just return to them.
So new Uniglow opening in Liverpool in a couple of weeks' time. You excited about that?
Yeah, I am. I think Mum's even more excited.
Let me talk a bit now, moving on from sort of shopping preferences to communication preferences. Now, there's a bit of a hackneyed old opinion that us oldies have got, which is that Gen Z today don't like picking up the phone. Do you think there's any truth in that? They don't like speaking on the phone.
Oh, there's definitely some truth in that. I know so many people who are absolutely petrified to have to ever take like a professional phone call, and they'll either get someone else to do it, even if it's just calling up for ordering food or something, like just as simple as that, when the person on the other end of the line really doesn't care what you're saying.
Well, it could be someone else your age on the other line, right?
Exactly. But
Domino's or something.
yeah, people very much avoid it. I think they all much prefer to just communicate via text, so then they don't.
And is that as equally true when they're communicating with each other amongst friends? Do you call each other and chat, or is that still more text-based?
I think there is a lot more calling. Well, not calling. I'd say that I know a lot of people who FaceTime their friends, but no one of that I know really call them.
Right. So what we do all the time, and when we put our phone to our ear, that's an alien concept.
Yeah. It doesn't
You see oldies doing that. What are you doing that for? You can't see the screen.
Yeah.
And if you had to do something, if you had to make a call to somebody, you know, to sort out, I don't know, something, your bank or your student loan or whatever it needs to be, do people actually just get on with it, and it's just that typical thing that when you're young you haven't got the confidence, you need a bit of practice? Or is there, you would do anything to avoid it? You'd use a chat facility, or you'd write them an email, or you do anything other than to ring them? Do you think that's...
I think some people definitely would try and avoid it at all costs and send like lots of emails instead. I think personally I definitely just pick up the phone and call them, because it would just save so much more time in comparison.
If you're being interviewed for a job, would you prefer to be interviewed in person or on screen?
In person.
Right.
In person.
And you don't mind the travelling for that then?
No, I think you get a better sense of who someone actually is if it's in person. And like you see all of the body language and everything and just how they act.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we get a lot of people talking about the best ways. You can obviously get through a lot more interviews in a day. You saw me earlier today. I was interviewing someone in Portugal, and I couldn't have done that from Shrewsbury.
Yeah, that's very
just
true.
jump off the call and have a cup of tea. You know, it would have been a whole day visit. So it's convenient, but like you say, not only from the interviewer's point of view of getting more of a sense of the person, but as a candidate, you feel as if you'd be able to present yourself so much better.
Yeah, I think
in
so.
person. Yeah. Just talking about the world of work then generally, imagining that, you know, we've just been to this fictional interview and you've turned up in person and you've got given a job. What sort of expectations do you think a Gen Z person might have about what the world of work is like?
I think a lot of people value work-life balance and the flexibility of being able to like work from home some of the time, because a lot of people like the 4-day week and things like that.
Would you like to work from home all the time?
I definitely wouldn't. I think most people, it's difficult. I think it's best to have a mix, because then you actually sort of meet the people you're working with more and actually be able to converse. But it depends. Some people, if they're not very invested or they just have too many things going on at home, they do just want to work at home.
Well, there's quite a movement, as you know, for a work from home degree of flexibility in lots of companies. And in fact, lots who went fully home-based during the pandemic have struggled to get everybody back into the workplace. Now, I can totally get that for lots of people, that suits all sorts of reasons: commuting time, childcare, having a dog in there, all the sorts of different things that it happens. But my worry has always been that young people are done a disservice with that, because I remember when I was young and I went into the workplace, I partially learnt through formal training, I partially learnt through doing things and just practicing, and both of those can be done remotely. But I also learnt by just watching things happening around me, just noticing how people politically manoeuvred their way into a better position or got their result that they wanted in a meeting because they had a quick chat in the corridor outside before they went in. And you wouldn't get that. So I worry that to bring new people into the workplace and really give them the best chance, you really need to be around it and see it. Do you feel that? Do you feel as if that might be a disadvantage?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like you're given a lot more opportunity if you're actually in the workplace, speaking to your supervisors, also just becoming a lot more sort of friendly with them, and then you're probably more likely to get given opportunities, which you wouldn't be if you're just at home and they never see you.
How would you rate the difference between the flexibility that you get in a job and your salary? Would you be prepared to sacrifice salary for more work-life balance?
I think maybe to an extent, but I would probably I'd prioritise salary, I would say.
So if you were offered a week of extra holiday but it was unpaid, would you take that?
Oh, that's quite tricky. I would potentially take the week of extra holiday.
There you go, you see, when it's made. As long as you've saved up enough to do something in your
as
week
long
of
as
extra
I
holiday.
still, I don't know. I feel like I do value being able to still go and do holidays and seeing people.
I think this is an easy question and people could probably guess the answer, but do you expect there to be a job for life?
What, for me to be able to do a job?
Yeah, if you get a job with somebody, do you expect that employer to look after you for long term?
Yeah, I would. You're forming, like, you're going to be there probably 5 days
That's
a week.
interesting. I expected a different answer there. I imagine that people are more used now to the idea of job hopping and moving around when it suits them. But you're more loyal than that, you think?
Well, I feel like, especially because I'm wanting to, like, go through medical school, I'm sort of with the expectation that I'm going to be with
Yeah, it's a particular
NHS
type
for
of
life.
job.
So I think it's hard for me to kind of relate.
Yeah, sort of an employer of choice.
Yeah.
And whose responsibility do you think it is to manage your career progression, making sure you do the right training at the right time? Do you expect the employer to take responsibility for that?
I'd say it's more on me, but I'd expect maybe the employer to sometimes help. But I think they'd be more likely, you kind of need to take the initiative yourself and maybe ask for the help and ask what you're needing to be doing.
And would you be more attracted, and I appreciate in the particular career you've chosen, you maybe have fewer options, but imagine generally, and perhaps you don't go into practicing medicine in the way you're imagining, it might be some allied industry. If you had to choose between different companies, would you make part of your decision based on how ethical that employer was, whether they had good corporate social responsibility, diversity policies, modern slavery policies and all that sort of thing, gender pay gap?
Yeah,
definitely. Does that matter a lot to you, do you think?
I'd say that matters a lot to me. I think they're very important values, and if a company wasn't abiding by them, I'd be very much put off and I probably wouldn't really want to work for them.
But even, okay, so there's two levels then. One is making sure they meet the sort of minimum standard required. Clearly that's almost taken as a given.
Yeah.
But some companies go out of their way to be really very positive and proactive in charitable works, and providing training in non-work related things to their employees and sending them gifts and branded clothing and all sorts, and making the whole round experience of employment a much more sort of, friendly give and take type thing. Does that work with you, or do you think it's just all a bit of hogwash and they're just trying to buy me?
I think, well, they are kind of trying to buy me, but I would also appreciate if they're doing good things like charity work and things like that. That would make me more likely
to go for a company like that.
Yeah.
What's your attitude to pensions? Do you think if you were given the choice in your first job in a couple of years' time, would you be prepared to sacrifice 5% of your salary to go into saving for your pension? Given that by the time you retire, you may well be well into your late 60s, whatever the law is by that time.
I think I probably would. It's something I've not really given that much thought about because it just seems so far off. But I would want to probably start paying into pensions as early as possible, just because I don't know what it's going to be like 50 or 40 years from now.
So if you have to make that choice between the extra night out or the extra takeaway, or whether you say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to make sure I put that bit ready for 50 years' time. Yeah,
I think I would want to, but I don't know how the rest of my generation would agree with that. But yeah, I'd prefer to put the money aside.
Depends how much you're earning a bit.
Yeah, that is very true.
What about your thoughts on the housing market? Do you think you'll end up owning a house? Would you like to?
I really hope I will, but it's all very, very expensive. And
do you think it's almost, as much as you'd like to, do you think it just becomes out of reach for people of your generation?
I think it's definitely out of reach for some people of my generation. It depends where I end up, and it will probably be a lot later than I'd want to be able to actually afford to buy my own house. So that's just... Yeah.
But a lot of people seem to be quite comfortable with renting now.
Yeah.
And maybe, in our generation, we were brought up to expect to save for a deposit, buy a home, maybe even a pretty run-down home that you had to do lots of DIY on and decorating and all of that. Whereas if you go into a rented accommodation, that's all sorted for you. You don't have any problems with house maintenance and putting the furniture in sometimes even. Do you not think that there's quite an attraction to that? Have we broken the link between the sort of Brits' passion for owning their own home?
I definitely do see the appeal of just being able to rent in terms of ease. I don't know whether I think I'd still prefer to be able to own my own property, but that would probably be at least probably in my 30s maybe that I'd get to that. I'd be happy to rely on renting for a long time up until then, and I think some people were probably happy to do it just for
I think the average figures now have gone up to about 35, 36 years old before people buy their first home, which is probably about 10 years later at least compared to when I was your age. So that's very different. The other average as well is the age at which people leave home, and that's up to 26 now.
Oh, wow.
It's quite high, do you think?
That's higher than I expected. Yeah. Is that just because people can't afford to
It's
leave
an
out,
affordability thing, or maybe they're saving up for a deposit, or maybe they're just saving up for other things, or whatever. So it's certainly the world has changed to some degree on that. Not anybody's fault. It's just economics. House prices have continued to go up, right?
Yeah.
The population's gone up faster than the Britain isn't getting any bigger, so we need more houses and all of that. So that's quite interesting. What's your thoughts? I think the young are getting quite a bad press at the moment, this last couple of weeks, about how many NEETs there are, not in education, employment or training. So there's quite a talk about how many young people are out of work, maybe even claiming benefits, possibly disability benefits, mental health issues or other physical disabilities, and not searching for work at all. Now, it seems to be a lot higher now than it was for previous generations on a like-for-like basis. Do you put that down to anything in particular? Is that sort of all just a COVID thing, or is it a generational attitude thing? Have we just got used to the fact that, hang on a minute, everybody has to work, so why would I have to?
I think it's quite largely down to COVID, in my opinion, because everyone kind of got used to not needing to work as much, and they had all this time, and then they realised, this is actually quite nice. I can just sort of do my own thing. And it's probably also slightly out of laziness some of the time, if they just don't really want to put in the effort to work. So, I would say it's quite largely down to COVID.
You
It could
reckon
also
that's
be a
probably it?
generational thing. But
So that may fade then, you think? If it was COVID, then as that gets further into history from our memories, then maybe that'll change, do you think?
Hopefully. But if everyone else around them is still doing those things and trying to avoid going into work, then it'll be there for a while.
Who are your role models?
Ooh, who are my role models?
Influencers or people you see on the TV? Or?
I'd say, I use Instagram, and I'd say that I look up to some of the people who I follow who are like athletes, and they're running all of these ultra marathons, 100k Ironmans and everything like that. And I'd say, if I had to say someone was...
So it's not a particular name of a person, it's a type of person.
It's just a group. I follow like various people who all kind of do similar things.
So health and fitness, because it's one of your interests, that would be something that you would look up to.
Yeah.
But not necessarily these other influencers that you see on Instagram promoting products, let's say, or whether it be diet products, cosmetics products, whatever. That doesn't really wash with you as much.
I don't really follow that as much, no.
You don't want to be an influencer?
No, I can't say I want to be an influencer. But sometimes our life sounds very... very fun.
Well, I'm sure they do. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about people you see in the news that are business people? How do they sort of rank in the sort of the list of different careers that people think are worthy of having?
I think probably lower than it probably used to be. I don't know.
Than the professions, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
Accountants, engineers, doctors.
Yeah, I think people always go for like the popular kind of influencers or TV kind of stars in terms of like influencers and
And do you think there's an appetite in your generation generally to run your own company, be an entrepreneur, set up your own thing?
I think a lot of people are very tempted by like being entrepreneurs, because you have the kind of control. You can decide everything about the business of what you're going to be doing and your timings and everything. I don't know.
Well, certainly the trend, the stats show that.
Yeah.
There's a lot more positive attitude towards starting up on your own. There's a lot talked about at the moment around the side hustle as well, that you get a main job, but then on the side you could be doing anything, whether it be of Etsy crafting or you do Airbnb or something else on the side.
I
so
think
that seems to be
popular,
more common, doesn't it? It'd be interesting whether that takes off, that sort of thing. It's interesting just as well to see the stats of what subjects people are going to university to study, and whether business still seems to be very popular.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether all those people come out and go into business, just like all those that did forensic criminal psychology or whatever it is, ended up going and doing that.
Yeah, I'd be interested by those stats, because I feel like a lot of people, when they're applying to uni, they really don't know what they're wanting to do just in their general life. So they'll just sort of pick something-ish to do with their subjects and what they enjoy and see where it goes.
And you've chosen the academic route for your next step after school, and you've already said that you've got a career sort of in mind that you're hoping to do, and best of luck. I hope that all works out, as we all know, even though it's going to cost me a fortune for a bit longer than an ordinary degree would have done. But what do you think generally, and once again, talking about perhaps your friends and so on, but what about apprenticeships? How do they fit in, do you think, in terms of the range of options available? Given that when you leave school, you could just go and get a job, you could get an apprenticeship, or you could go to university. Do you think apprenticeships are seen positively, or have you noticed any talk about that?
I think they are seen positively. I know a lot of people who considered them and got them when they left sixth form, but I also know since speaking to them after starting them, they've struggled with the transition straight into work life and not kind of having the uni experience, and just, I have a friend who's waking up at like 5 a.m. going into work, and then that's just, it scares her a bit because that's just her life for the foreseeable future.
But it must be tempting that you don't have £50,000 or more
definitely.
Of student loan hanging over your head.
You're actually earning money
and you're earning
instead.
money,
yeah.
Probably in the period you're at university, you could earn 50,000, 60,000.
It is a very tempting alternative, definitely.
Yeah.
And you're learning on the job, and it's just,
And do you think it's good to have a minimum wage for people of your age? Good that you get more money, but it may mean that it's harder to get jobs if businesses, see it as not advantageous to get a younger person. So pros and cons, what do you think?
I do think it is good to have a minimum wage because people would take advantage otherwise.
So let's say there should be a minimum wage.
Yeah.
Now let's think for, say, an 18-year-old, if yours is the same rate as a 21-year-old. If it's lower, you got more chance of getting a job, but it means you're getting paid less. So what do you think?
I think, because I feel like I'd genuinely prefer to get the job and have the lower wage just so I actually have a job, because there's so much, especially like over uni summers and stuff like that, the competition to actually find a job in a supermarket or whatever is so competitive.
Right. So the fact that you can offer a wage advantage to the employer by being younger. I saw there's a shop around the corner from here. It's got a sign up saying they're looking for waiting staff, must be under 21.
Oh, wow.
Clearly because the minimum wage is lower. Do you think that's fair?
I don't really think that's completely fair. I understand why they're doing it, just from the money-wise, but I don't think that's really how they should completely focus it on. I don't know.
Okay, final question then. This is your chance now to leave your mark on the world.
Oh dear.
If there's, looking at the way businesses are run, bearing in mind the audience we've got today are going to be business people, be it either owning or managing businesses, what one thing would you like them to do differently from what you see?
I think it's definitely using social media to your advantage and making sure you do have like marketing and things which could appeal to younger audiences, like cool flashy videos. I like when I go onto your Instagram page, I like all of the reels and how they can catch your attention in just a short clip, because people of my generation don't tend to have very good attention spans, so it needs to be short.
Keep it short. Good tips. Okay, well, there you go. You heard it here first. Well, thanks, Kirsty.
Yeah, thank you.
Very kind of you to come in. That was okay,
fun
wasn't
experience,
it?
yeah.
Exactly. So there you go. You managed to get the perspective of an 18-year-old from all sorts of angles, from financial planning, job expectations, and communication styles and everything. So thank you very much again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Hopefully you found something interesting there if you're an owner or manager of a small or medium-sized business. If you like what you heard, then please pass on a link to what we're doing to some of your friends. Tell them at the pub. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.